the last speaker, Nuno Soares. Nuno is an architect and urban planner based in Macao, spreading his practice through architectural design, teaching and research. Is coordinator of the architecture program at the University of San Joseph, and is also the founder and the director of the Macao-based CURB, Center for Architecture and Urbanism, a non-profit that promotes research, education, production, and the dissemination of knowledge in architecture and urbanism, taking local issues at a global audience, and he's also principal of his own office, Urban Practice, where he develops projects ranging from the urban scale to architecture and design, both in Macao and abroad. Nuno is presenting Public Matters, Identity, Design and Placemaking in Macau's Inner Harbour. Nuno, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luisa, for the introduction. Let me see if I can put my screen, if I can share it with you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, maybe, yes, full screen.
Full screen now.
Now, yes.
Okay, so good afternoon. Thank you, Luisa, for the introduction. Thank you, Francesco, for the invitation and for organizing this event. I took this as I always take these possibilities of looking at what we are doing in order to give a reply to your question, Francesco. So your question was so precise that I had to look into my into what I'm doing to be able to give some kind of contribution to your question. And the presentation is called Public Matters, Identity, Design and Placemaking in Macau's Inner Harbour. So I'll go through, so this is the place that we're talking about. So what you're seeing in front is Macao. What you're seeing on the right is China. This is the Inner Harbour. This is the historical center of Macao. So this presentation is Public Matters. So public is something that relates that involves people in general, that is not limited to a particular group of people. It's available for everyone to use. Matter is a situation or a subject that is being dealt with or considered. A substance of things of a particular type is something that is important, that affects what happens. So public matters, and why are we talking about public matters? Because in the situation in Macao, the term public domain, public space, public, it's not a acquired term. So it's something that is vague. So we need to start by establishing that field. And then we're moving on into these three topics that are interrelated. So I'll show you, taking from Gianni's words, I'll show you some strategies and some tactics. So projects that will deal with this space, the Inner Harbour, in different scales, in different moments of Macau's life and of my life. So identity, let's start looking at the identity of the Inner Harbour. So what is this space about? So the first thing that I'm going to show you is a book that we published in 2018 about the Inner Harbour vernacular heritage. That is a book that started with an event that was hosted at CURB, the first event of CURB in 2013. So we did a book about this place, trying to understand what is the Inner Harbour about. So we did a background document and we tried to understand this reality. So this is the harbour that you see in blue. Historically, this area was reclaimed to the sea. So you will see on the 16th century was just the mountain part. So all the Inner Harbour is reclaimed land throughout the centuries, and it ended in the beginning of the 20th century. So this usually was the historical harbour where ships would take cargo from the ships to land. So this was the interface between, it was the port of the city. So these are some of the images that compare the previous situation to the existing situation. So of course it was highly densified, but all the original urban fabric is still there. So it was expanded, but it's still there. So if we look into Macau heritage and into the world heritage, is outside this area. So this area has barely any heritage that is acknowledged by Macau as world heritage or has local heritage. One of the main axes is the Samalô, it's Almeida Ribeiro, is the main commercial street that opened the inner harbor to the outer harbor. So when they opened the street in the 20th century, basically the center shifted from the inner harbor to the outer harbor, and it was being left unattended since then. So if we look to the built heritage, although no heritage is acknowledged in the Macau heritage list, there's a very rich heritage. So we have patios, we have a network of over 200 entities that are acknowledged, that are called patios, with Chinese vernacular architecture. We have arcades that follow the Raffles plan. So it's a public space under the buildings that was continuous in the entire inner harbor. We have piers that are unique to Macau. So the pier that you see on top is a pier that expands the public space to the first floor. So it's directly connected to the street. So something that we see in Hong Kong that was happening in Macau before the war, the World War II. We have also hotels that are quite unique to this area of town. This was basically the pier. So first hotels in Macau were located in this area. So then we look also into the immaterial heritage. So we went through all the streets and we talked with the community, with different stakeholders. So shrines are prevalent on every street. We have the bamboo theater, similar to what Peter was showing before. We have a bamboo theater that is assembled every year next to Ama Temple for 400 people, a covered space for 400 people. We have a floating village. So Macau was managed by the Portuguese, but in Portugal, in terms of statistics, we just have the normal population. But in Macau, we have, in statistics, we have the floating population and the normal population. And this population was up to 5% of the overall population. So we have what we call a floating village, people that live in boats during the entire year, and that just stay in Macau for periods where they cannot fish. So they stay next to Macau, and we still have 200 of these boats. Then we have on this inner harbor, ship chandlers, seafood shops, markets, tree hawkers, salted fish. If you want to buy it to cook is in the inner harbor. It's the only place where you can find this in Macau. We have very unique markets and traditional commerce that is related to this area. And then we have, in terms of challenges, we have the road network that is very dense. We have flooding, we have not many green spaces, only at Ama Temple, and we have large empty plots that are being redeveloped. So we did this roundtable. We looked with 60 people about, we talked about the inner harbor for a few days. We did the background document. We published a recommendation, a policy recommendations that we sent to all the government departments in 2014. And one of those, so focusing on urban planning. So it was a grassroots. So it was me at CURB, the Institute of Asian Studies in the Netherlands, many local scholars. We got together to create this event, to basically give a contribution to what could be done with the inner harbor to improve the conditions on the inner harbor, but looking at the local identity. And we've provided policy recommendations for urban planning, for architecture, at many levels. And one of the issues was environmental issues. So we say that the most pressing issue was in 2014, the floods, and that it was really needed to have a plan to deal with that. We submitted this to the government. In 2017, 10 people died with flooding on this area. Nothing was done during all these years. And after all of this, after Atu typhoon, after they acknowledged that this was done and that they knew this, they came back to us and they asked us, okay, so now that you really know about this place and that you did this research, can you please help us to design the master plan for the public domain of this area? So we started with this grassroots. We looked into the identity of this place. We talked with the different stakeholders. We incorporated their feedback and their opinions for the future development of the seat of the inner harbor. And then nothing was done for several years. And in 2020, I was surprised with this call with the new chief executive in Macau, trying to look into the inner harbor and to really create an area, improve the public domain, to improve the quality of life of local people on that area, which was what we were advocating from the beginning. So what I'm showing you now is moving to the second part. So we start on the identity, and now we move to the design. I'll be very quick on this because this is an ongoing project. But basically what we are doing now is the southern inner harbor public domain, the strategic vision for this area, and we are already developing projects for 6 zones. And to explain you what is this about, this is the Macau government and the Civic Affairs Bureau that asked USJ, University of St. Joseph, to collaborate to do a project for the Macau community. So the first thing, we had to create this typology of project that did not exist in Macau. So we had no projects for public space, no projects for public domain. So we had to create this new term for Macau, which is public domain, and we had to define what is this about. So this diagram that you see, it's basically explaining in a summarized way what is the public domain about. So they asked us, they didn't have the form, the procedure, we had to create a framework. So this is establishing this framework. So of course we picked up key strategic development goals from the UN Habitat to work with, and we created a new methodology that hopefully will be used in the future to understand the site and the constraints, to set the future vision, to have goal-oriented activities, strategies and projects, define strategic policies and framework plan, engaging the community and key stakeholders, a concept design for key intervention areas, and the presentation and dissemination to the overall community. So this looks quite standard, but in Macau, this did not exist. So the context is no longer the full inner harbor, it's just it's half of it. It's the southern inner harbor that you're seeing on these images. I'll guide you through very quickly through this ongoing project. So we had to align, so what you see on the image is Macau, Taipei, and Coloane. We had to align international best practices, regional planning, local guidelines, and the detailed plan. So the area that we're dealing with has a population of 42,000 people, a population density of 77,000 people per square kilometer, which is very dense, and about 1/4 of the population is non-local employees. So it's a very specific and unique ecosystem in Macau. Then in terms of street typologies, we are doing the public domain, but we barely have space because the narrowest street is 1 meter and the widest one is 20 meters. And the 20-meter ones we are not touching because it's out of the scope. So we are talking about very narrow alleys. And these alleys, they have also in common that they are all flooded. So whenever there was a flood, the Atu typhoon flooded the entire inner harbor. So all the streets that you're seeing, they are floodable. So we also need to do something that is waterproof because basically there's still no plan in place to prevent floods. So we have now the Macau Master Plan that was just published this year that also puts a bit of effort on turning the inner harbor into a commercial area. So changing the interface. And we have many challenges, as I was showing before. The first one is the floods, dilapidated buildings, the public, it's a very narrow alleys, but they are all open to cars. So you can park, you cannot drive, but you can park, which is very strange because basically we are removing pedestrians from very, very narrow streets with 2.5, 3 meters, but we allow cars to be there. Then in terms of opportunities, this is the historical harbor. We have a lot of heritage that is not really acknowledged. It's on the waterfront. And we have lots of uses and people still use the space in a very intensive way. So this is a very interesting place. So we have to create, going back now to Kate's presentation in the beginning, a vision for this precinct that was acceptable for all stakeholders. So the master plan for the public domain on the inner harbor wants to establish it as the historical downtown harbor of Macau and aspires to achieve high quality public realm for local communities and visitors using sustainable design principles and strategies. I'll guide you very quickly through the key design strategies. So in terms of place qualities, this is a cultural place, a place that we want to make connected with the rest of the city, a vibrant place, fine-grained and sustainable, which are quite generic, but then this is broken down into very specific actions. So in terms of design principles, we have 10 design principles that we are now implementing on each project. The zoning character. So I'll go through very quickly this. So this zone, although has a long history, it's very difficult to understand as a whole. And we were able to identify these 6 zones that have unique characters. So we need to basically highlight that and reinforce that character. It's at this moment is a car-dominated district, but cars can barely move because it's very narrow. So we need to move it from car-dominated to pedestrian-focused districts. Then we need to celebrate the unique urban fabric and heritage. We have patios, we have waterfront lines that kept on changing, but they are still visible. So this is a very rich urban fabric that we need to celebrate. Then we need to connect it to the water. At this moment, we cannot have a coffee next to the water. We cannot read a book next to the water. It's the inner harbor, but you cannot touch the water. You cannot be next to the water. So that is one of the first objectives. Then we need to increase and optimize public space. We have 1 square on this area, and we have very little public space. So we need to turn spaces that are used for car parks, that are used, we need to turn them into pedestrian spaces. Then we also need to have street art and signage, because it's already happening on the inner harbor, and it's important to activate areas that are very hidden in the city. And we need to help people to navigate for hazards. So whenever there's a typhoon, they need to know where to go so that they don't get trapped on the flood, but also for people to just be able to go to the inner harbor. At this moment, no one goes to the inner harbor. Lively and productive streets. So we need to allow hawkers to have places to develop their business. We need to allow streets to be basically used by people and to be activated. Efficient transport. So we need to reduce the car area, but we need to make the transport more efficient so that we can have more space for pedestrians. Then we need to also design for resilience. We know that this area is flooded, so we need to, this is something that we cannot ignore, and we need to allow these areas to recover quickly and to be more resilient whenever a flood comes. And we need to maximize green. So in most of the areas, of the 6 areas, the count of trees is 0. So the inner harbor is an area that is maximizing green is really necessary, and we need to really be creative because we don't have much room. Okay, so this is the master plan that is happening now. So if the first part was a grassroots project that I was showing you, trying to understand this place, talking with many people, the second one was already trying to design, trying to implement some strategies that would help to reinforce the usage of public space on the inner harbor. But then it's not enough. It's not enough to just do research, and it's not enough to just do master plans. So we've been also doing at CURB several placemaking initiatives that I want to also share with you. And this presentation deals with identity, deals with design, and deals with placemaking, and all these things are needed. And even with all these things, the critical mass is not yet there. It's just building up. So I'll show you some of the initiatives that we do at CURB, Center for Architecture and Urbanism. And one of these is called the On the Move. So this is the rooftop of our pier, Pier 9, on the core of the inner harbor. So every year for the last 4 years, we've been doing the On the Move event, which is we pick up people that want to join us to ride bicycles through Macao, and we ride those bicycles. And then we have crazy video makers that are taking the videos with us, and then they do a screening of that, of all of that. So by doing this, we tell people that it's possible to ride a bicycle. We tell people that inner harbor is really a very interesting and very rich place. So we empower people to ride bicycles, we empower people to celebrate their city and their experience through the city. And this has been very successful. We opened the inscriptions is like 10 hours after it's full, and we've been doing in different formats throughout last years. And basically this is creating many people more buying bicycles, many people doing this kind of events. Then we have another one that is called ephemeral windows. So in Macao, there is a beautiful tradition of graffiti in rice paper, which I find it very elegant. So we have street artists that paint rice paper, and then they paste it on the wall. So if we don't like it, we can just remove it. And many times they stay. So we created this workshop with street artists and with kids and parents to basically do this on our rooftop. So it's street art on the rooftop. It's turning the rooftop into a public, alternative public space. And again, this was, we had an Italian artist from Hong Kong working with us, Barlow, that you can see in the center. We had our the creative director, Filipa, also participating on this. And this was to basically build up critical mass, to say people that they can participate, they can edit their city, they can build up on this topic that is quite relevant on the Inner Harbour, which is street art. Then we had another one that is artboards for future memories. So asking people, what do you want to create in Macau? So we pick up these shop boards and we invited anyone willing to join us to propose ideas through drawings. So people came to us and they proposed farms on the rooftops, many different ideas in an enjoyable way. And we did this installation on the rooftop with the chopboards that are traditional from Macau. And we were also mapping each one of the contributions as ideas for the future of Macau. And then we were surprised with one of the last things that I'm going to show you, that the Cultural Affairs Bureau, they were looking for public venues to do the Hush Festival, which is a music festival. And they've asked us if they could use the rooftop of Pier 9 during COVID to have an event. And they said, oh, can we have 40 people on the rooftop? So they went to our rooftop, they created the spaces for 80 people. They publicized this. We had lots of bands coming. And from 40 people, we went up to 500 people, which was the biggest crowd in a public space on the Inner Harbour. But that was not on a public space, it was on the rooftop, which is one of the biggest spaces with 600 square meters that we have available on the Inner Harbour. So what you're seeing is Hush Festival 2020. So we had lines of people lining up on the street to go up to the rooftop. We had 500 people on the rooftop. And this year, the Ponte 9 rooftop is becoming almost like a public venue. So for many different events, they are basically knocking at our door to see if we can open. And of course we can, and we want to basically celebrate this possibility. So I think that what I'm trying to show you with these all examples is that in places like Macau, there's lots of potential and lots of stuff to be done. And one of the joys is to be able to understand this, to look into this reality and to act at different levels. Trying to understand in the identity part, trying to also create frameworks and to create design proposals to enable people to use the space, and also trying on our own practice to open our space. This is our space and we are trying to open it to the city to basically create critical mass. So I think that whenever it's to basically create, in terms of placemaking, there are many strategies and many tactics that we need to focus on, and to build up critical mass in areas like the Greater Bay is essential. So I think that we really need to do, as Peter was doing in a small scale intervention, we need to do many of these interventions so that people start to see the possibilities that are there to basically empower them to use the public space. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuno. It's such a huge project from, theory, methodology, implementation, public engagement. How long it took to implement such a huge program?
So it started in 2013 and it's ongoing. Hopefully we'll have the first streets being renovated next year.
Wow, that's very exciting. So while I was watching, I never visited Macau. I was following your presentation. I was like, I need to go and visit this amazing place and be part of some of the events that
sure, you're most welcome, all of you.